Gary Lionelli, congratulations on your recent Emmy nomination for scoring the documentary OJ Made in America. How did it feel when you got the news you'd been nominated?
Thanks so much. Well, I hadn't been really expecting it. You know, it's a very competitive field, and but I was thrilled that so many of our team got nominated. And I was just at the computer reading Google News, and I saw that Emmy nominations announced. So I checked it, and I was pretty stunned to see, you know, my name there, to say the least.
Well, it's one among many nominations that the film got. Also, the film just won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. It really struck a chord with viewers. Why do you think the film has had such resonance with viewers and with Academy members?
Well, I think that, you know, initially when I was approached to do the film, I thought that maybe it was just going to be a simple recounting of the OJ trial and the crime scene, and that would be the end of it. And I soon found out that it was couched in a broader historical context, you know, with what was happening in Los Angeles at the time, with race relations in the country as a whole. And once I found that out, it seemed to be a much broader scope, and I became really interested. I think people were a little surprised to view those events within that historical context. So I think that's why it resonated. People hadn't made that connection. I think they made it possibly subliminally, but not, they weren't aware of it. So I think that's really the reason why it became such a hit.
Going off of that, like you said, I mean, the film does view the OJ Simpson story through the context of all of these social and political events that were going on at the time, LA riots, for instance, Rodney King. Can you talk about delving into all those different layers with your music?
Well, what I tried to avoid was, excuse me, I tried to avoid scoring what was on the screen literally. In other words, I tried to avoid scoring the action of the scene. You know, if there was the Bronco chase or whatever it may have been, I was scoring the subtext or the consequence of what was happening in a broader sense. You know, what was going on in the mind of the characters on the screen, or what was happening historically, rather than simply scoring a chase or scoring a break-in, whatever. So I was thinking more thematically and looking at the tragedy of the event more than anything else.
And I mean, you really get the sense of this, the tragic rise and fall of this American icon. Can you talk about, I mean, was there an arc to your music that that was sort of complementing OJ's arc?
Not so much. It was really sort of episode driven in that the film was divided into, it was an entire concept as one film, but by necessity to be broadcast on TV, it had to be divided up. So we had, you know, the introduction and his career as a football player, you know, going into his marriages, then going into the murders, and then going into the trial, and then going into the Vegas. And so each of those episodes, just by their nature, were so different from each other that they had to be dealt with differently musically. But at the same time, there were a few, you know, overall OJ-ish themes that I did use to link everything together, if that makes sense.
Can you talk a bit more about what some of those were?
Well, the director, he pretty much gave me free rein to do whatever I wanted to do, but he did want there to be a trumpet in the score. So the trumpet was sort of the mechanism by which we viewed the tragedy of the life of OJ Simpson through. And that trumpet was used throughout the entire film. And that was the unifying element. That also, along with an oboe, we had a little bit of you know, oboes usually mean sad music. We didn't use it so much as a sad element, but as sort of a melancholy mechanism. So those two instruments really unified with some themes, you know, behind them, the overall arc of the score.
Well, you mentioned that. I mean, I think there is sort of a mournful quality to the score. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. Again, Ezra's directive was to have sort of a lonely detachment, sort of, which is not that difficult for a trumpet to do. You know, we've seen Miles Davis do that. It's sort of part of the character of the instrument when you choose to play it in a certain style. And I used sort of that approach over orchestral strings that we recorded. And the combination of the two gave me that sort of sparse and lonely feel that I was looking for, which comments on the ultimate, what do you want to call it? Downward trajectory of OJ's life.
Right. This is really a massive undertaking. I mean, the 7.5-hour documentary. Can you talk a bit about some of the challenges of writing music for something that lengthy, shall we say, for lack of a better word?
Well, you know, I'd never done anything. Essentially, this is five 90-minute films. That's what I would do in a year. And I had initially 3.5 months to do that. And I said, there's no way I can do this. So we got it stretched out to 5 months, which ended up being, I think, 11 days before it aired in theaters. If you're in this business, you're used to the idea that you have to put in an ungodly amount of hours to get jobs done. And this was just more of the same, but even more concentrated. So we were just putting in, 15-hour days, 7 days a week. And that on top of having an orchestral session at the end, which that eats up a lot of time for the orchestrator and everybody else involved. So, it was a challenge, and I just kept putting one foot in front of the other and not looking at or thinking about the fact that I had to score almost 200 pieces of music. I just focused on the one that I had at in front of me on the computer on every single day. That's pretty much how I did it.
Was there a particular piece of music that was difficult for you?
Difficult. Not really. I think, I got to the point where, I think every composer hopes they get to the point in a film where you really feel you've got it and you're sort of in the bloodstream of the film. And once you get there, things start flowing. And I think that's the way it was for me after a short amount of time. Mm-hmm. The first assignment for me from the director was to not start at the beginning, but to start at the Bronco chase. So that was a 30-minute segment. And that meant that I had to score a lot of different types of scenes within that entire chase and the beginning and middle and the end. So that sort of gave me some repertoire that I could draw on later for the rest of the film.
The timing of this interview is really kind of unique, shall we say, in that OJ Simpson was just paroled after spending 9 years in prison, which of course is documented in the film, the circumstances that led up to that. I'm curious, since you worked so intimately on a project about this man's life, what was your, I guess, reaction to hearing the news about that? Well,
I mean, it's pretty obvious from seeing the film that, in the last episode, here he is, in trial in Las Vegas for, essentially a 2-bit robbery, and he gets 33 years. So everybody, the subtext of that scene was that, well, yeah, he's there in jail for maybe payback. And, but according to the laws, he is due his parole after 9 years. So technically they really had to give it to him. Like the film in general, it wasn't the point of the film to make a judgment call on OJ. It was really just to show what was going on in the country at the time that led to the decision of that trial. And that's sort of been my take. I have my own personal feelings, of course, on OJ. But again, it had nothing to do with the music or anything. It is pretty, amazing that it wasn't even on my radar that he was up for parole until a couple of weeks ago. And so pretty shocking,
Well, it's incredible because it was broadcast on television, and I, along with a lot of other people, were watching it. Certainly the documentary and also the FX miniseries have to do a lot with the, shall we say, OJ fascination
Right.
as of late. Why do you think this man's story is still so compelling to people after all these years?
Well, I think, it definitely was, a spectacle when it happened. It was the trial of the century. To many people, it was unthinkable that he could get off from those murder charges. And so everybody kind of wanted to know why. And maybe our film supplied a few reasons for to the answer to that question. And whenever something is, I mean, if he had been put in jail 20 years ago and they threw away the key, I don't think the interest would be there. I think people would have thought, well, justice was served, and let's turn the page and let's see what else is happening in the news. But that didn't happen, and a lot of people felt that something was wrong with our system, something was wrong with the country, and they needed to some closure. So I think because of all those things left hanging, I think the film and the effects series, as well as ours, resonated. People were starved for more information on everything about OJ. So.
Just a couple more things before we go. I mean, you've worked primarily in documentaries. I wonder what attracts you to that format.
Right. I like writing music for real life events. Not that writing music for narrative film is any less noble or anything like that. I just get a kick out of scoring material that maybe everybody knows about and trying to find a way to bring that to an audience in a different way. It's kind of it's a little bit of a different animal, but in many regards, it's not any different than scoring a narrative film. When I do score narrative projects, my approach to the music is no different. It's exactly the same. But and the other part of it, the more you do one thing, the more you get hired to do the same thing. So it's like it takes on a life of its own. So I'm happy to be doing it, and hopefully it'll continue.
Well, I think that this film and some of the others that you've worked on are really good examples of using narrative techniques in documentary filmmaking. I mean, there's no more compelling 3-act structure than the rise and fall of OJ Simpson.
Right. Yeah, for sure. It's it's almost, some of these things that you come across are almost too good to be true, or too, if it had been written as a script, people might think, this is over the top, it's not believable. But when it happens in real life, and that's the way it is, it's you have to believe it and you have to deal with it. So yeah, but the OJ story as a whole was, and it continues to be, a shocker.
Now, this is your first nomination at the Primetime Emmys. But you've won 3 sports Emmys, and you've also competed twice at the Daytime Emmys. Right. What does that kind of recognition mean for you?
Well, it's I don't really, awards aren't on my radar, but it is sure nice to get one. It's, I go, my reward is sort of getting on particular jobs that I'm interested in, this being one of them. But it would sure be nice to sort of have, a feather in my cap or something like this. I think it's a worthy, topic and subject matter, and it would be very, I'd be very honored if it should happen. If not, I'm thrilled with the nomination. Really, it's with the field that large, I'm just very happy with just that.
Well, Gary, congratulations again, and thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Zach. Take care.
You too. Have a good one.